The way you sleep tonight, alone in your bed, expecting 8 uninterrupted hours of rest, would have seemed bizarre to every human who lived before the 18th century. For over 1,000 years, our medieval ancestors followed sleep patterns so fundamentally different from ours that modern sleep scientists are only now beginning to understand what we lost when we abandoned them. Let us uncover the strange world of medieval sleep habits, from the communal beds shared by entire families and strangers to the mysterious midnight watch that split every night in two. These weren't primitive customs or signs of a less civilized time. They were sophisticated adaptations to a world without electric light, and they reveal something profound about human nature that we've forgotten in our rush toward modern efficiency. Imagine if I told you that sleeping through the night in one long stretch was actually unnatural. That's right. For thousands of years, our medieval ancestors practiced something called segmented sleep, or as historians call it, biphasic sleep. Here's how it worked. People would go to bed shortly after sunset, around 8 or 9 p.m. But here's the fascinating part. They wouldn't sleep straight through until morning. Instead, they would sleep for about 4 hours, then wake up naturally around midnight or 1 a.m. This wasn't insomnia or a sleep disorder. This was perfectly normal. This midnight awakening period was called the watch by some, or simply the time between first sleep and second sleep. Picture this. In the deep quiet of a medieval night with no electric lights, no traffic, no modern noise, people would wake up in this peaceful interlude. What did they do during these midnight hours? Some would pray or meditate. Others would lie quietly and interpret their dreams, which were believed to be more vivid after the first sleep period. Some medieval people would use this time for intimate conversations with their bed partners. Scholars and poets found this the perfect time for uninterrupted writing and thinking. The mind was refreshed from the first sleep, but still in that dreamy, creative state. Some brave souls would even visit neighbors during this midnight period. Imagine walking through medieval streets in the middle of the night just to have a chat. After an hour or two of this gentle wakefulness, they would naturally drift back into their second sleep until dawn. This pattern was so ingrained in medieval culture that there are over 500 documented references to it in historical texts, court records, and literature from the period. Now, let's talk about where medieval people actually slept, because your idea of personal space at bedtime would have seemed quite luxurious to them. In medieval times, beds were communal spaces, and I mean truly communal. An entire family might sleep together in one bed, arranged in a very specific order. The parents would sleep in the middle, with daughters lined up along the wall side of the bed, youngest closest to mother. Sons would arrange themselves on the other side, also in age order. But it didn't stop there. If you had guests visiting, they'd join the family bed too, positioned on the outside edges. Servants might sleep at the foot of the bed, regardless of what activities might be happening elsewhere in that bed. Even strangers traveling and staying at inns would share beds with other travelers they'd never met before. Picture this scene. You're a medieval traveler arriving at an inn after a long day's journey. The innkeeper shows you to a room where several other strangers are already settled in for the night. You'd climb into bed with them, arrange yourself to minimize fidgeting. There were actual etiquette rules about this, and settle in for the night with people whose names you might not even know. For the poorest people, sleep meant lying on thin woven mats or mattresses stuffed with wool, hay, or moss, placed directly on the floor. The lucky ones had straw mattresses, and let me tell you, in medieval times, a good straw mattress was considered quite comfortable. The actual beds of medieval times tell their own fascinating story. For the wealthy, beds were status symbols, elaborate constructions with ornate canopies and richly embroidered hangings. These weren't just for show. The heavy curtains around the bed created a private space within larger rooms and helped retain precious body heat during cold nights. But for most people, a bed was much simpler. Wooden frames, when they had them at all, were softened with straw mattresses. Historical records tell us that people would sometimes hide in these straw mattresses. There are accounts of people literally burrowing into the straw, filling to hide from enemies or authorities. The bedding itself was often shared and passed down through generations. Fine linen sheets were a luxury. Most people made do with rough woolen blankets or whatever warm covering they could find. And here's something that might make your skin crawl as you lie in your clean, modern bed. Medieval beds were absolutely teeming with fleas, lice, and other pests. Rich and poor alike dealt with these unwelcome sleeping companions every single night. Some tried to combat this with tightly woven mattress covers, but for the most part, sharing your bed with insects was just an accepted part of medieval life. They'd shake out the bedding, but the bugs always returned. Your sleeping arrangements in medieval times said everything about your place in society. If you were a noble, you might have a private bedchamber, though even then you'd likely share it with servants who slept at the foot of your bed or on small pallets on the floor. Castle sleeping arrangements were particularly interesting. Most servants and military personnel slept on pallets or trundles, essentially mats made of woven straw, and rushes laid directly on the floor. Nobody was assigned a private sleeping spot. You'd claim whatever space you could find, spread out your mat, and hope for the best. In monasteries, monks slept in dormitories on simple straw mattresses, raised slightly off the floor on boards or woven rushes. Even here, in these religious communities, sharing sleeping spaces was the norm. For peasants in their one-room cottages, the entire family would sleep crammed together on thin mats or straw-stuffed mattresses. Children, parents, elderly relatives, and sometimes even farm animals all shared the same space for warmth and protection. The concept of a child having their own bedroom was completely foreign. Privacy during sleep was a luxury that simply didn't exist for the vast majority of medieval people. Medieval people had fascinating beliefs about sleep and dreams. The time between first and second sleep was considered especially sacred. Dreams that came after the first sleep were thought to be more meaningful, more likely to contain messages from God or glimpses of the future. Some medieval people would spend their midnight wake time interpreting the dreams from their first sleep period. They believed that the mind was more receptive to divine messages during these quiet hours. Prayer books from the period actually contained special prayers meant to be said during this midnight wakefulness. The darkness of medieval nights was profound in a way we can barely imagine today. With no electric lighting, no street lamps, no glowing screens, the night was truly dark. This darkness shaped not just when people slept, but how they thought about sleep itself. Sleep was seen as a kind of practiced death, a temporary separation of the soul from the body. This might sound morbid to us, but medieval people found this comforting rather than frightening. Sleep was a daily reminder of the temporary nature of earthly life and a preparation for the eternal rest that awaited them. Interestingly, going to bed late was actually considered somewhat antisocial in medieval times. Most people followed the natural rhythm of the sun, going to bed shortly after dark and rising with dawn. Those who chose to stay up late were often viewed with suspicion. What were they doing in those dark hours? So what happened to these medieval sleep patterns? Why don't we sleep this way anymore? The change came gradually, starting in the 17th and 18th centuries. The invention of better artificial lighting, first improved candles and oil lamps, then gas lighting, and finally electric lights, began to extend the day. People could stay awake longer, be productive later into the evening. The Industrial Revolution sealed the fate of segmented sleep. Factory work required people to sleep in one consolidated block to be ready for long, continuous work shifts. The natural rhythms that had governed human sleep for thousands of years were replaced by the rhythms of machines and productivity. By the 19th century, doctors were actually prescribing consolidated sleep as healthier, though this flew in the face of thousands of years of human experience. The two-sleep pattern that had been completely normal for our ancestors was suddenly labeled as a disorder. Some modern sleep researchers now wonder if we lost something important when we abandoned these medieval sleep patterns. They point out that many people naturally wake up in the middle of the night and worry that something is wrong with them, when in fact they might simply be experiencing an ancient, natural rhythm. So there you have it, the weird and wonderful world of medieval sleep. As you drift off tonight in your private bed, with your clean sheets and pest-free mattress, perhaps you can imagine what it might have been like to sleep as your ancestors did. Maybe tonight, if you wake up in the small hours, instead of checking your phone or worrying about tomorrow, you might lie quietly in that peaceful darkness and let your mind wander as medieval people did during their midnight watch.